Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'd been working at the sporting goods store on Riverside Plaza for about 8 months when everything went to hell that Saturday in October. It was one of those big chain stores where they sell everything from camping gear to exercise equipment, and I was just a part-timer trying to pay my way through community college. The job wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent, and most of my coworkers were pretty chill, except for Nathan. He'd started about 2 months after me, and right from the beginning, there was something about him that made everyone uncomfortable. He was maybe 35, always wore the same faded blue polo shirt even on his days off when he'd randomly show up, and had this habit of talking to himself while he worked, not just regular mumbling like when you're trying to remember something, but full conversations where he'd respond to things nobody else had said. The muttering got worse as time went on, and it was always the same theme: how the managers were out to get him, how they gave him the worst shifts, how they were trying to make him quit. Julie, our assistant manager, tried talking to him about it once, real gentle-like, asking if everything was okay at home, if he needed to adjust his schedule. But Nathan just stared at her with these empty gray eyes and said she was part of it too, that she was documenting everything to build a case against him. After that, Julie started scheduling herself on different shifts than Nathan, and I noticed other people doing the same. But I needed the hours, and Saturday was our busiest day with the best tips from helping customers load heavy equipment, so I kept working alongside him, keeping my distance but trying not to make it obvious. That particular Saturday started like any other October weekend. Parents buying soccer gear for their kids, hunters stocking up for deer season, the usual chaos. Nathan was assigned to the camping section while I handled athletic footwear, but our departments were close enough that I could hear his constant muttering from 3 aisles over. Around noon, the store was absolutely packed, and I was helping this mom find cleats for her twin boys when I heard Nathan's voice getting louder. He was talking about respect, about how they would see what happens when you push someone too far, about how today was the day things would change. The mom I was helping must have heard it too, because she grabbed her kid's hands a little tighter and asked if we had those cleats in the stockroom, clearly wanting to move away from his area. 20 minutes later, our store manager, Robert, walked past Nathan's section doing his usual rounds, clipboard in hand, checking displays. Nathan watched him go by, and I saw his jaw clenching and unclenching like he was chewing on words he wanted to spit out. Robert didn't even look at Nathan, just made some notes about the camping display and moved on. But Nathan followed him with his eyes, his knuckles white as he gripped a price gun. Then Nathan set the price gun down very deliberately and walked toward the back of the store. I thought maybe he was going on break, but something about the way he moved, purposeful, almost mechanical, made me watch him until he disappeared through the employee doors. When he came back 5 minutes later, he had his personal backpack with him, which was weird because we're supposed to keep those in our lockers during shifts. I was ringing up a customer at the footwear register when I heard the first crash. It sounded like someone had knocked over an entire rack of baseball bats, that distinctive metallic clatter echoing through the store. Then came another crash and another, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Customers started looking around nervously, and I stretched up on my tiptoes trying to see over the displays. That's when I saw Nathan in the camping aisle, methodically sweeping entire shelves of merchandise onto the floor, his face completely blank like he was in some kind of trance. A Coleman lantern exploded against the tile floor, sending glass skittering in every direction. Parents were already grabbing their kids and heading for the exits, and I reached for the phone under my register to call for management, when Nathan pulled something out of his backpack that made my whole body go rigid. A box cutter, but not the regular kind we used for shipments. This was bigger, industrial looking, and he was holding it up, examining the blade like he was seeing it for the first time. Robert came running toward the camping section, probably thinking it was just an accident or maybe a customer having a medical emergency. He slowed down when he saw Nathan standing in the middle of the destruction, surrounded by sleeping bags and broken camp stoves, holding that box cutter. "Nathan, buddy, let's talk about this," Robert said, using that fake calm voice managers learn in training. But Nathan just laughed. Not a normal laugh, but this hollow, bitter sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After months of writing me up for nothing, changing my schedule last minute, giving everyone else the good sections?" His voice kept getting louder with each word, and he was gesturing with the box cutter, making Robert step back. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the file you're keeping on me. But guess what? Today I'm writing the performance review." The store turned into complete chaos in seconds. Customers were running for the exits, abandoning their carts, some of them recording with their phones even as they backed away. I saw my coworker Brandon from Sporting Goods trying to guide people out through the side entrance, and Keisha from customer service was on her radio, probably calling 911. Nathan started walking toward Robert, who kept backing up until he bumped into an end cap display of protein bars. "Everyone always treated me like I was invisible, like I was nothing," Nathan said, kicking aside a tent he'd thrown on the floor, scheduling me alone on truck days, making me clean the bathrooms when it wasn't even my turn, laughing behind my back in the break room. He pointed the box cutter at different employees who were frozen in place watching. "Oh, I heard you all. I heard everything. Ashley making fun of how I eat my lunch, Doug calling me weird to the new hires, all of you thinking you're so much better than me." My manager, Janet, appeared next to me and grabbed my arm, hissing at me to get to the stockroom immediately. But I couldn't move. I kept thinking about all the times I'd been alone with Nathan in the store, all the times he could have done something like this when it was just the two of us doing inventory or closing. Nathan must have sensed movement because he suddenly turned in our direction, and when he saw Janet trying to pull me away, his whole expression changed. "Janet, the queen of scheduling, you're the worst of them all, making me work every single weekend, giving Ashley my shifts when I called in sick that one time, telling everyone I was on thin ice." He took a step toward us, and that finally broke my paralysis. Janet and I ran toward the stockroom, and I could hear Nathan shouting behind us about respect and consequences, and how today everyone would finally understand what they'd done to him. The stockroom was a maze of metal shelving units packed with inventory, and Janet led me deep into the back where we kept the overstock exercise equipment. We crouched behind a wall of treadmill boxes, and I realized I'd left my phone at the register. Janet had hers, but her fingers were trembling so badly she could barely unlock it. We could hear Nathan out in the store, crashing more displays, yelling at anyone who hadn't escaped yet. "Where's Janet?" he kept shouting. "Where's my wonderful manager who made my life hell?" Through the stockroom door's small window, I could see him pacing near the entrance, still holding that box cutter, occasionally slashing at clothing racks as he passed. The police sirens were getting closer, but they sounded impossibly far away. Janet was whispering into her phone with 911, telling them we were trapped in the back, that he was armed, that he was looking for us specifically. Then the stockroom door handle started to turn. Janet and I pressed ourselves against the treadmill boxes, trying not to breathe. The door opened slowly and I could hear Nathan's footsteps on the concrete floor. "I know you're in here," he said, his voice eerily calm now, nothing like the shouting from before. "You can't hide from consequences forever. That's what you told me, right, Janet? When you wrote me up for being 5 minutes late? When you said I needed to face the consequences of my actions?" His footsteps were getting closer and I could hear him pushing boxes aside, checking behind shelving units. Through a gap in our box wall, I could see his feet just 2 aisles away. He was methodical, checking every possible hiding spot, and at the rate he was going, he'd find us in less than a minute. Janet looked at me with wide eyes and pointed toward the emergency exit at the far end of the stockroom, but to get there, we'd have to cross open space where he'd definitely see us. Suddenly, we heard multiple voices shouting, "Police, drop the weapon," from the main store area. Nathan's feet stopped moving, and for a moment everything was completely silent except for the humming of the stockroom's fluorescent lights. Then he laughed again, that same hollow laugh from earlier. "They don't understand either," he muttered. But he was walking away from us now, back toward the stockroom door. We heard him exit, and then there was shouting, commands to get on the ground, more shouting from Nathan about files and schedules and respect. Janet and I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, until a police officer found us and said it was safe to come out. Nathan was already in custody, and as they led us through the store, I saw the full extent of the damage. Thousands of dollars of merchandise destroyed, displays overturned, that box cutter abandoned on the floor near the camping section where they'd tackled him. The store stayed closed for 3 days while corporate figured out what to do. They brought in counselors to talk to all of us, and I found out that Nathan had been keeping a journal where he'd documented every perceived slight, every imagined conspiracy against him, going back months before he'd even started acting strange at work. He'd been planning this for weeks, apparently, waiting for a busy Saturday when he could make the biggest impact. I couldn't go back to work there. Every time I tried, I'd remember that blank look on his face as he destroyed everything, the way he'd hunted for us in the stockroom. I quit 2 weeks later and got a job at a coffee shop downtown. Janet transferred to a different store in another state. The sporting goods store reopened eventually, with new staff who had no idea what had happened there. Sometimes I drive past it, and it looks so normal from the outside, all bright lights and sale signs, and I think about how quickly a regular Saturday can turn into the worst day of your life, how someone you work next to every day can be carrying around so much rage that you never really see until it explodes. The auto shop sat on the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama, squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop like an afterthought. 4 bays, faded blue paint peeling off concrete walls, and a sign out front that flickered whenever it rained. That was where I spent most of my days that summer. At 26, I'd been turning wrenches there for about 8 months, mostly oil changes and brake jobs, putting away every dollar I could toward maybe opening my own place someday. Frank, the owner, only showed his face when it was time to collect cash or complain about expenses, leaving just 3 of us to handle the actual work. There was Carl, an older guy who kept his head down and his mouth shut, myself, and Tommy, who'd started about 2 months before that Thursday night in August when everything went sideways. The humidity that day had been brutal, the kind that makes breathing feel like drowning and turns the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Tommy had seemed normal enough when Frank first brought him on, maybe a bit rough around the edges, but nothing unusual for our line of work. He stood about 6'2", built like a linebacker gone to seed, with these thick forearms covered in old tattoos that looked like they'd been done in someone's kitchen with a sewing needle and India ink. His face told stories you didn't want to hear. Deep lines carved around bloodshot eyes, a nose that had been rearranged more than once, and a jaw that clenched and unclenched even when he was trying to relax. But what really made you notice Tommy were his hands. Massive, scarred things with knuckles like walnuts, permanently swollen and discolored from years of connecting with things they shouldn't have. First few weeks he'd actually been decent to work with, bringing gas station coffee for everyone in the mornings, cracking jokes that were only half mean. Then around week 3, something shifted in him like a gear slipping out of place, and he started showing up reeking of Jim Beam and Marlboros, talking to himself while he worked underneath the cars. The first real incident happened on a Tuesday morning when a socket wrench went flying past my head and punched a hole through the drywall. Tommy claimed his hand had slipped, but I'd watched him wind up and throw it after struggling with a rusted bolt for all of 5 minutes. Carl just kept working on his Honda like nothing had happened, but I could see his shoulders tense up every time Tommy walked by his bay after that. The next week, Tommy got into it with a customer about a bill, voices getting louder until he was screaming about respect and how nobody appreciated good work anymore. Frank had to come down and smooth things over, gave the customer a discount just to get him out of there. But Frank didn't fire Tommy, said good mechanics were hard to find, and maybe the guy was just going through something. We all go through something, right? That's what Frank said before he left us alone with Tommy again, who spent the rest of that day slamming cabinet doors and kicking toolboxes. By the 6th week, working with Tommy felt like being trapped in a cage with a rabid dog that hadn't bitten anyone yet. He'd show up later and later, sometimes not until noon, his work clothes looking like he'd slept in them, dried vomit on his steel-toed boots that he didn't bother to clean off. The smell coming off him was something else, not just alcohol and cigarettes anymore, but this sour, rotting smell like meat left in the sun. He'd dropped at least 20 pounds, his face going from rough to skeletal, cheekbones jutting out like knife blades under gray skin. The worst part was watching him work on cars in that condition. His hands would shake so bad he'd drop bolts into engine bays, then spend 20 minutes fishing them out while cursing under his breath, in this continuous stream of threats against people who weren't even there. One afternoon, I heard him having a full conversation with someone while working under a Chevy, but when I looked, he was alone under there, just arguing with the air about money someone owed him. That Thursday started off quiet, which should have been my first warning. Tommy hadn't shown up by lunch, and Carl and I were actually getting work done without having to dodge flying tools or listen to drunken rambling. Around 3 in the afternoon, a customer came to pick up their Ford, and I was finishing up the paperwork when Carl tapped me on the shoulder. He had this look on his face like he'd just watched someone die, and all he said was, "I'm leaving. Right now. You should too." Before I could ask why, he was already grabbing his jacket and heading for his truck. Through the bay door, I saw Tommy's beat-up Silverado pulling into the lot, driving crooked, clipping the corner of our dumpster with a sound like thunder. Carl peeled out of there so fast he left tire marks. The customer took one look at Tommy stumbling out of his truck, mumbled something about coming back tomorrow, and practically ran to their car. Tommy stood in the parking lot for a good minute, swaying like a tree in a storm, one hand pressed against his truck for balance while the other hung at his side holding something I couldn't quite make out. His shirt was torn across the chest, showing a fresh gash that was still bleeding, and his left eye was swollen shut, purple and yellow like a rotten plum. He kept touching his pocket, checking for something, then looking around the lot like he was expecting someone to jump out at him. When he finally started walking toward the shop, it was with this determined, purposeful stride that didn't match how drunk he obviously was. He came through the bay door and just stood there, backlit by the afternoon sun, and that's when I saw what was in his right hand. A Ruger revolver, the kind my grandfather used to keep in his nightstand, except this one was scratched up and wrapped with electrical tape around the grip. "Hey buddy," he said, his voice thick and slurred. "We need to have ourselves a conversation about respect." The bay door started rolling down behind him, and I realized he'd hit the button on his way in. That heavy metal door coming down sounded like a coffin lid closing, cutting off the afternoon light inch by inch until the shop's fluorescent bulbs were all we had. Tommy walked deeper into the shop, using the hood of a Camry to steady himself, leaving bloody handprints on the white paint. The gun stayed pointed mostly at the floor, but his finger was on the trigger, tapping it like he was keeping time to music only he could hear. "Where's Carl?" he asked, then laughed, this wet, choking sound. "Doesn't matter. Carl's a coward. Always was. But you're still here. That means something." He stopped about 10 feet from me, leaning against a tool cabinet, and I could see his whole body trembling, not from fear but from whatever cocktail of substances was fighting it out in his bloodstream. The smell hit me full force then. Whiskey, blood, sweat, and something chemical like he'd been huffing paint thinner. "Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my brain screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go with that door down and him between me and the only exit. He tilted his head at me like a confused dog, then raised the gun, not quite pointing it at me but not pointing it away either, just holding it up like he was showing it off. $40, he said. That's all I needed. $40 to make things right. And Frank said no. Said I hadn't earned it yet. 8 weeks I've been here, breaking my back, and he can't front me $40? He slammed his free hand on the cabinet, and tools crashed to the floor. The sound echoed in the closed shop, bouncing off the concrete walls. But that's not even the real problem. The real problem is what I heard you all saying. Yeah, I heard it. Talking about me like I'm some kind of joke. Poor Tommy, drunk Tommy, crazy Tommy. His good eye was wild, darting around the shop like he was seeing things that weren't there. And maybe he was. He started pacing, dragging his feet in this shuffling walk, the gun swinging at his side. Every few steps he'd stop and stare at something. A wrench on the ground, an oil stain on the floor, the calendar on the wall with its bikini model still stuck on May even though it was August. My ex-wife. She used to look at me the same way you're looking at me right now, he said and laughed that wet laugh again. Like I'm some kind of animal, like I'm dangerous. Well, maybe I am dangerous. Maybe that's what it takes to get respect around here. He spun around suddenly, almost lost his balance, caught himself on a jack stand. The gun went off just once, punching a hole through a Pepsi machine in the corner. The sound in that enclosed space was incredible, like someone had set off a bomb inside my skull. My ears rang and I could see Tommy's mouth moving but couldn't hear what he was saying for a few seconds. When the ringing faded, he was laughing, staring at the Pepsi pooling on the floor. Didn't mean to do that, he said. Or maybe I did. Hard to tell anymore. The next 20 minutes felt like hours, with Tommy alternating between rambling about his ex-wife, his kids who wouldn't talk to him, and some fight he'd gotten into at a bar the night before, apparently where he'd gotten the gash on his chest and the black eye. He made me sit on a milk crate near the back wall while he continued pacing, sometimes pointing the gun at me, sometimes at himself, sometimes just waving it around like he'd forgotten he was holding it. He went through this cycle where he'd get angry, screaming about respect and money and Frank, then get sad, almost crying about his kids, then get paranoid, accusing me of calling someone, of setting him up, of being part of some conspiracy with Frank to get him fired. The worst moments were when he'd go quiet, just staring at me with that one good eye, the gun perfectly still in his hand, like he was making a decision. During one of these silences, I heard sirens in the distance, and Tommy heard them too. His whole body went rigid, and he looked at me with this expression of pure betrayal. "You called them," he said, but it came out more like a question than an accusation. The sirens were getting louder, definitely heading our way, and I could see him putting it together in his head. Carl must have called after he left, or maybe the customer, or someone who heard the gunshot. Tommy backed toward the door controls, keeping the gun trained on me, his hand shaking worse now. "This ain't how it was supposed to go," he kept saying. "This ain't how it was supposed to go." The sirens were right outside now, and through the small window in the bay door, I could see red and blue lights painting the walls. Tommy looked at the door, then at me, then at the gun in his hand like he'd just remembered it was there. For a moment, I thought he was going to shoot me just to make a point, or maybe shoot himself to avoid what was coming. Instead, he did something I'll never forget. He walked over to the workbench, set the gun down carefully like it was made of glass, and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. "Tell them I didn't hurt nobody," he said, and started crying, these big gulping sobs that shook his whole body. "Tell them I just needed $40. The police came through the door about 30 seconds later, guns drawn, screaming commands, but Tommy just sat there with his hands on his head, sobbing. They cuffed him and dragged him out, and I watched through the window as they put him in the back of a squad car. The whole thing had lasted maybe 45 minutes from when he'd first walked in, but it had felt like a lifetime. I gave my statement to the police, called Frank to tell him what happened, then drove home and sat in my apartment until the sun came up, trying to process what had just happened. I never went back to that shop. Frank mailed me my last paycheck, and I heard later that he'd closed the place down. Couldn't find decent help anymore. About 6 months later, I saw in the paper that Tommy had been sentenced to 3 years for aggravated assault and unlawful imprisonment. The article mentioned he'd been struggling with methamphetamine addiction on top of the alcohol, which explained the chemical smell and the paranoia. I never found out if he got help inside, or if his kids ever talked to him again, or what happened to him after he got out. Sometimes I drive past where the shop used to be. It's a cell phone store now, and I think about that night, about how $40 and a broken man with a gun changed everything. The parking garage at my office building had these yellow lights that made everyone look sick, like we all had jaundice or something. Every night around 6:30, I'd take the elevator down to level B2, where my beat-up Corolla waited in spot 47, right next to this concrete pillar someone had spray-painted "Dave Sucks" on months ago. The medical billing company I worked for kept us late most nights. Insurance claims don't file themselves, and by the time I'd leave, the garage would be mostly empty except for a few cars belonging to the cleaning crew. That Tuesday in November, I remember specifically because my phone had died and I couldn't listen to my usual true crime podcast on the walk to my car. I heard footsteps echoing behind me. Not unusual, except these footsteps stayed perfectly synchronized with mine. When I sped up to test it, they matched my pace exactly, like whoever it was didn't want me to know they were there. Kevin from data entry was standing next to my driver's side door, just standing there with his hands in the pockets of these khaki pants that were way too short for him, showing his white tube socks and beat-up New Balance sneakers. His face had this expression I'd never seen on him before. Not quite a smile, but his mouth was doing something weird, like he was practicing different expressions and couldn't pick one. He had this thermos in his hand, one of those old plaid ones from the 80s, and he was tapping it against his thigh in this rhythm that didn't match anything, just random taps. When he saw me notice him, he took a step back but not far enough, still blocking my door. "Just wanted to make sure you got to your car safe," he said. And his voice had this quality to it, like he'd rehearsed the line 100 times in his head, but still got the inflection wrong. The worst part was how he said, "your car," emphasizing it like he knew things about it, like maybe he'd been there before, touching it, looking inside. I mumbled something about being fine and tried to squeeze past him, but he shifted his weight just enough to make it awkward. The thermos kept tapping, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 and up close I could smell his breath like stale coffee mixed with those butterscotch candies old people keep in glass bowls. "The security guard leaves at 6, he said, completely unprompted, like this was vital information I needed. "But I stay until 7 most nights, 7:15 sometimes. I've noticed you usually leave around 6:30. The way he rattled off these times made my chest tight. He'd been tracking me, keeping some kind of mental schedule. I finally pushed past him, keys already out, jabbing them between my fingers like my mom taught me. As I fumbled with the lock, he just stood there, that thermos still tapping, watching me struggle with the door handle that always stuck when it got cold. The next few nights I started varying my exit times, 6:15, 6:45, even stayed until 7:30 once just to throw him off. Didn't matter. Every single night there was Kevin, somewhere in that garage. Sometimes he'd be by the stairwell door, examining the fire extinguisher like it was fascinating. Other times he'd be 2 cars over, pretending to search for something in a car that definitely wasn't his. I knew he drove some old van because I'd seen him loading boxes of paper into it once during lunch. He never approached me directly again, but he was always there, always watching with this blank expression like he was waiting for something. Started taking different routes through the garage too, going up to B1 and walking back down, cutting through the reserve spots even though it added 5 minutes. Didn't help. He'd materialize somewhere along my path like he had the whole place mapped out, like he knew every possible route I could take. After about a week of this garage cat-and-mouse game, I decided to start taking the bus instead. My apartment was only 4 miles away, and the number 19 stopped right outside our building every 20 minutes. Told myself it was about saving gas money, even bought a monthly pass to make it feel like a financial decision, rather than fear. That first Monday taking the bus, I felt this huge relief washing over me as we pulled away from the curb, and I didn't see Kevin anywhere. The bus was mostly empty that time of evening. Just me, some teenager with massive headphones, and this elderly woman knitting what looked like the world's longest scarf. I actually relaxed for the first time in days, watching the city blocks roll by through the scratched-up windows. Got off at Cedar Avenue, walked the 3 blocks to my apartment, and even stopped at the corner bodega for milk without constantly checking behind me. Tuesday evening, same routine. Stayed at my desk until 6:40, walked straight past the elevator to the parking garage and headed for the bus stop instead. The 19 pulled up right on schedule, that familiar wheeze of the doors opening, and I climbed on, scanning my pass. Grabbed a window seat halfway back and pulled out my phone to scroll through nothing important. 2 stops later, at Riverside and 3rd, I glanced up and there was Kevin, settling into a seat 4 rows behind me. He had that same plaid thermos, holding it on his lap with both hands like it was precious. He wasn't even trying to hide that he was staring directly at me through the gap between the seats. When our eyes met in the window reflection, he didn't look away. Instead, he lifted the thermos slightly like some kind of twisted toast and took a slow sip without breaking eye contact. The next 3 stops felt like hours. Every time someone got on or off, I hoped Kevin would suddenly remember he needed to be somewhere else, but he just sat there, occasionally taking these tiny sips from his thermos. At Monroe Street, I made a split-second decision and jumped up, rushing for the back door just as it was closing. Managed to squeeze through, heard the driver yell something, but I was already on the sidewalk, walking fast in the opposite direction the bus was heading. Cut through the pharmacy parking lot, ducked into the laundromat, and watched through the steamy window as the bus disappeared down the street. Waited 15 minutes, then called an Uber from a fake pickup location 3 blocks away, making the driver circle around before taking me home. Cost me $18 but felt worth it. When I finally got to my apartment, I deadbolted the door and shoved a chair under the handle, something I hadn't done since my first week living alone. Wednesday morning, I went to HR. Brenda from Human Resources had this office decorated entirely with motivational posters and succulent plants that were definitely fake, but she watered them anyway. Tried to explain the situation without sounding paranoid. Kevin was following me, showing up wherever I went, making me uncomfortable. She did this thing with her face where she was trying to look concerned, but I could tell she was already mentally filing this under office drama, not my problem. Asked me if Kevin had threatened me, if he'd touched me, if he'd said anything explicitly inappropriate. When I said no to all of that, she suggested maybe he was just socially awkward. Maybe he had a crush and didn't know how to express it properly. Some people just don't understand boundaries, she said, like that made it okay. She promised to have a gentle conversation with him about professional distance. That afternoon, Kevin didn't come back from lunch. His desk stayed empty, computer screen dark, that lighthouse calendar still stuck on January 2015. For 2 days, no Kevin. Started to think maybe HR actually did something right. Maybe he'd been transferred or decided to quit rather than deal with the embarrassment. I went back to driving my car, even parked in my old spot 47 next to the Dave Sucks pillar. Thursday night, I stayed late finishing a massive batch of claims that needed to be submitted by Friday morning. The office was dead quiet, except for the humming of computers in sleep mode, and that one fluorescent light in the break room that always flickered. Around 8, I finally powered down, grabbed my stuff, and headed for the elevator. The parking garage was completely empty on B2, just rows of vacant spaces and those yellow lights making long shadows. My footsteps echoed off the concrete as I walked to my car, keys already out. That's when I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. Not a ticket or flyer, but a manila folder, the kind we used in the office for filing claims. Inside the folder were photos, dozens of them, all of me, taken from different angles and distances over what must have been months. Me at my desk, visible through the office windows from the building across the street. Me buying coffee at the shop downstairs, taken from inside. Probably from one of those corner tables I never paid attention to. Me waiting at the bus stop, shot from across the street with a zoom lens that caught the title of the book I was reading. But the ones that made me stop breathing were the ones from outside my apartment. Me carrying groceries up the front steps, Me checking my mail in pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt. Me through my living room window at night, just a silhouette against the TV's blue glow. At the bottom of the stack was a bus schedule with all the routes I'd taken highlighted in yellow. And next to each one, written in this impossibly neat handwriting, were notes. Gets off at Cedar Avenue, walks 3 blocks north, and sometimes stops at corner store, buys milk or bread, never alcohol. I called 911 from right there in the parking garage, standing next to my car with those photos scattered on the hood like evidence in a crime scene. The dispatcher kept asking if I was in immediate danger, and I kept saying I didn't know. How could I know when he could be anywhere, watching right now? 2 officers showed up within 10 minutes, an older guy with a gray mustache who looked tired, and a younger woman who actually seemed to give a damn. They looked through everything, took photos of the photos, asked me about Kevin, about work, about any previous interactions. The woman officer told me this was textbook escalation, that the 2-day absence after HR talked to him was probably him planning this, maybe even following me more intensively to get these recent shots. They said they'd pick him up for questioning, told me to stay with someone for the night. Consider getting a restraining order first thing in the morning. I drove straight to my sister's place in Oakwood, 40 minutes away, checking my rearview mirror the entire time for any sign of that old van. The police found Kevin's van parked 3 blocks from my apartment at 2 a.m. that night. Him sitting in the back with what they described as surveillance equipment, basically a camera with a telephoto lens and notebooks filled with my daily routines going back 6 months. 6 months of him documenting every pattern in my life, while I barely knew he existed. They arrested him for stalking and found out he'd been fired from 2 previous jobs for similar behavior with female coworkers. The judge granted a permanent restraining order, and Kevin got 18 months in county jail plus mandatory psychiatric treatment. I never went back to that office. Quit over email that weekend. Had my sister pick up my things from my desk. Moved to a different apartment. Changed my phone number. Even deleted most of my social media. Sometimes I still catch myself checking if anyone's walking too close behind me. Still park near security cameras when I can. The detective told me Kevin had been planning something, that the folder was probably meant to scare me into confronting him alone, but they never figured out exactly what. I don't think I want to know. I've been driving deliveries for about 5 years now, mostly around the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. It was September 2023 when everything went down, right when the heat was finally starting to break and we could actually breathe outside again. I was 34, divorced, living in a 1-bedroom apartment near the distribution center where I picked up packages every morning. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. 40 to 50 stops a day, decent tips, and I knew most of the regular customers by name. The job kept me busy enough that I didn't have to think too much about how empty my apartment felt when I got home. I'd gotten pretty comfortable with my routine. Coffee at 5 a.m., load up the van by 6, finish my route by 3 p.m., grab a beer, watch some TV, repeat. That all changed when they hired Adrian. Adrian started on a Monday morning, and I remember thinking he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He had these deep-set gray eyes that never seemed to focus on anything for too long, and this habit of rubbing the back of his neck whenever someone asked him a question. The supervisor paired him with me for training, said I should show him the ropes for a week or 2 until he got his own route. He was quiet, almost painfully so, but he worked hard, harder than most new guys. While other rookies would complain about the heavy packages or the confusing addresses, Adrian just nodded and lifted whatever needed lifting. He had these thick, calloused hands that looked like they'd seen real work, not the soft hands most people have when they start this job. When I asked where he'd worked before, he just said construction mostly, and changed the subject to ask about the best routes through the neighborhoods. We fell into this weird rhythm pretty quick. Every morning, Adrian would already be waiting by my van when I got to the depot, always wearing the same faded baseball cap pulled low and a plain gray hoodie. even when it was still 90 degrees at dawn. He'd help me load without being asked, arranging packages by neighborhood in this methodical way that actually saved us time. During the drives between stops, he'd stare out the passenger window, occasionally pointing out shortcuts I'd never noticed despite working these streets for years. The guy had this uncanny ability to remember every house after seeing it just once. He'd recall if they had a dog, where they wanted packages left, which houses had cameras. I figured he was just one of those detail-oriented people, maybe former military or something. He never ate lunch with the other drivers, always said he brought food from home, but I never actually saw him eat anything except these protein bars he kept in his pocket. After that first week, Adrian got his own route, but we still carpooled to save gas. He lived somewhere past my place, he said, though he always had me drop him off at this strip mall about 2 miles from my apartment, claiming his girlfriend picked him up there. The arrangement worked. He'd throw in $20 for gas every week, cash only, always crisp bills like they'd just come from an ATM. He started opening up a little more during those drives, told me he'd moved here from Colorado for a fresh start, that his ex had really done a number on him. Nothing too specific, just enough to make him seem like any other guy running from a bad relationship. He knew a lot about baseball, could talk for hours about stats and players I'd never heard of, and it made the morning commute go faster. The thing that should have tipped me off happened about 3 weeks in. We were delivering in this upscale neighborhood, Scottsdale area, those houses with the circular driveways and perfect desert landscaping. I'd parked to deliver a package while Adrian waited in the van. When I came back, he was slouched down in his seat, cap covering his face like he was sleeping. But I caught him watching this house across the street through the side mirror, really studying it. When I asked if he was all right, he straightened up real quick and said he thought he saw someone he knew from Colorado. Didn't want the awkwardness. Made sense at the time. People run into their past all the time in Phoenix. It's where everyone comes to reinvent themselves. He was extra quiet the rest of that day, kept checking his phone, which was weird because I'd never seen him use it before. The phone itself was one of those cheap prepaid ones, not a smartphone like everyone else has. What really got under my skin was how he knew things about houses we'd never delivered to. We'd drive past a place and he'd mention something like, they'd just installed that new fence last month, or that family's usually gone on Wednesdays. When I'd ask how he knew, he'd brush it off, say he must have covered that area with another driver, or maybe he was thinking of a different street. He had this way of making you doubt your own memory, like maybe you were the one misremembering things. But I started paying attention after that. He'd get antsy around certain intersections, always suggesting we take different routes when we got near the wealthy subdivisions on the east side. Said traffic was better his way, and usually he was right. But it felt deliberate, calculated, like he had a mental map of places to avoid. 6 weeks after Adrian started, I was sitting in my living room after work, half watching the local news while scrolling through my phone. They were doing this segment about a string of home invasions that had been happening over the past few months, mostly in Scottsdale and Paradise Valley, the exact areas Adrian always wanted to avoid. The reporter was talking about how the robberies were coordinated, happening when families were guaranteed to be out, like the thief knew their schedules. Then they showed the surveillance footage. It was grainy, black and white, but the guy moved exactly like Adrian. That same purposeful walk, shoulders slightly hunched forward, the way he turned his head to scan surroundings. But it wasn't until they showed a clearer image from a doorbell camera that my whole body went rigid. Even with a bandana covering the lower half of his face, those gray eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes that sat 2 feet from me every single morning in my delivery van. I must have rewound that news segment 15 times, comparing every detail. The height was right, the build was right, even the way he held his hands when he walked matched perfectly. The reporter said the suspect was considered armed and dangerous, linked to at least 12 robberies where he'd stolen cash, jewelry, and electronics worth over $200,000. In one case, a homeowner had come back early, and the suspect had beaten him so badly He spent 3 days in the ICU. They mentioned the FBI was now involved because the crimes crossed state lines. Apparently, similar robberies with the same MO had happened in Colorado before stopping abruptly 4 months ago, right around the time Adrian said he'd moved to Phoenix. I sat there in my dark apartment realizing I'd been driving around with this guy for 6 weeks, that he knew where I lived, that tomorrow morning he'd be standing by my van like nothing was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Every scenario played through my head. Calling the cops right away, confronting Adrian, just not showing up to work. But what if I was wrong? What if it was just some horrible coincidence? And even if I was right, this guy knew my routine, knew my address, had been in my van dozens of times. Around 3 a.m., I decided I'd act normal, go to work, and call the police once I was safely away from him. My phone was fully charged. I had the FBI tip line number saved, and I'd even written down all the suspicious things I'd noticed about him in case my mind went blank. When my alarm went off at 5, I was already dressed, had been for an hour. The drive to work felt surreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body. Every red light made me want to turn around, but I kept going, telling myself I just needed to get through one more morning. Then I'd never have to see him again. Adrian was already there when I pulled into the depot, same spot as always, leaning against the wall near where I usually parked. But something was different. He wasn't wearing his usual gray hoodie. Instead, he had on a black jacket I'd never seen before, and he kept his hands in the pockets. When he saw me, he pushed off the wall and walked over, but instead of his usual half-hearted morning greeting, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We need to talk." His voice was different too, lower, more controlled. He suggested we sit in my van for a minute before clocking in, said he had something important to tell me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but he was standing between me and the depot entrance where other drivers were gathering. So I unlocked the van, and we both climbed in, him in the passenger seat where he'd sat every day for 6 weeks. Except this time I was acutely aware of how easily he could reach me if he wanted to. Adrian sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds, staring through the windshield at the depot. Then he turned to me and said, "You watched the news last night." It wasn't a question. I started to deny it, but he held up his hand and continued. "I saw your van parked outside your apartment when I went by around midnight. Your TV was on, could see the news through your window." My mouth went completely dry. He'd been watching my apartment. He pulled his hands out of his pockets, empty thankfully, and rubbed his face like he was exhausted. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but I need you to listen. Yes, that's me they're looking for. Yes, I did those things, but I'm done now, getting out today. There's a bus leaving at noon for Mexico and I'll be on it. I just needed one more normal morning to make sure nobody was watching me." He explained that he'd been casing houses during our delivery routes, using the job as cover to learn people's patterns. The stolen goods were already sold, money already moved. All he needed was to disappear quietly, and he'd specifically chosen to tell me because I'd been decent to him, hadn't asked too many questions. He reached into his jacket slowly, and I tensed up, but he just pulled out an envelope, thick with cash. "There's $8,000 here," he said, setting it on the dashboard. "For your silence until tomorrow. By then I'll be across the border and this becomes someone else's problem." He told me if I called the cops now, he had friends who knew where I lived, knew my routine, implied things would go badly for me. But if I waited just 24 hours, we'd never cross paths again. Then he did something that still gives me nightmares. He smiled, genuinely smiled, and said I was the only person in years who'd treated him like a regular human being. He opened the door, climbed out, and walked across the parking lot toward the street. I watched him disappear around the corner, then sat there staring at that envelope for another 10 minutes before I finally called 911. The FBI got there within an hour, but Adrian was already gone. They found the apartment he'd been renting under a fake name, completely cleaned out, except for a mattress on the floor and a wall covered in photos. Houses from our delivery route, all marked with schedules and notes. They never caught him. That envelope is still in evidence, and sometimes I wonder if I should have just taken it and kept quiet. Either way, I quit the delivery job that same day and haven't been able to get into a vehicle with a stranger since. The fluorescent lights in Mercy General's East Wing always flickered between 1 and 3 a.m. I'd been working there as a janitor for about 6 months when everything went sideways that night in early June. The pay was decent, better than what I made at the warehouse, and the overnight shift meant an extra $1.50 an hour. My name's Grace, 34 years old, divorced, raising 2 kids on my own. The night shift worked perfect for me. My sister watched the kids while they slept, and I could be home in time to get them ready for school. Hospitals at night have their own rhythm, this steady pulse of beeping machines, whispering nurses, and the occasional code blue that sends everyone running. My supervisor, Gloria, had paired me with this guy named Victor when I first started. He'd been there for maybe 3 years, knew every corner of that massive building like the veins on his own hands. Victor was the kind of person you'd forget was in the room. Average height, brown hair that always looked damp, and these pale gray eyes that never quite met yours when he talked. The first few months were normal enough. We'd split up the floors, meet for our break in the basement cafeteria around 2 a.m., share stories about the weird stuff we'd seen. Hospitals collect strange people at night, grieving families, drunk patients, doctors running on their 5th cup of coffee. But Victor himself started becoming the strangest part of my shifts. I began noticing things about him that didn't add up. He'd disappear for 20-30 minutes at a time, always with some excuse about checking supply closets or helping maintenance. When we worked the same floor, I'd catch glimpses of him slipping into areas we weren't supposed to clean. The records room, the pharmacy storage, places that required key cards we didn't have. The way he moved bothered me too. Everyone else's shoes squeaked on those polished floors, but Victor glided through the hallways like smoke. What really got me thinking was the camera thing. Every hospital has security cameras everywhere. In the hallways, near the elevators, by the nurse stations. One night I was mopping the 3rd floor cardiac unit when I noticed Victor doing this weird dance down the hallway. He'd walk normally for a few steps, then suddenly duck his head and shift to the left, pause by a doorway, then continue. At first I thought maybe he had back problems or something, but then I started paying attention to where the cameras were positioned. Every single move he made kept him in the blind spots. He knew exactly where each camera pointed, knew the precise angles where he'd be invisible. When I asked him about it once, casual-like while we were emptying trash bins, he just gave me this long stare and said he didn't like being watched. Said it in a way that made me drop the subject immediately. That particular June night started like any other. I punched in at 11 p.m., grabbed my cart from the supply room, checked the assignment board. Gloria had us both on the 4th floor, the psychiatric ward. Not my favorite area with all those locked doors and tiny windows, but the pay was the pay. Victor was already up there when I arrived, standing at the far end of the hallway near the emergency exit. Just standing there, not cleaning, not moving, staring at something on the floor. I called out to him, asked if everything was all right. He turned his head just slightly, enough for me to see his profile in the dim emergency lighting, and held up one finger. Wait. The psychiatric ward was quiet that night, most patients sedated or asleep, and the nurses were all gathered at their station dealing with some paperwork crisis. Just me and Victor in that long, sterile hallway. I pushed my cart closer, the wheels squeaking against the waxed floor. As I got nearer, I could see what he was looking at. Patient files, dozens of them, scattered across the floor like someone had thrown them there in a hurry. The papers were fanned out in a semicircle around his feet, some of them photocopies, others original documents with the hospital's official letterhead. Medical histories, psychiatric evaluations, medication lists, personal information, things we absolutely were not supposed to be looking at, let alone have spread out on the floor. Victor wasn't wearing gloves either, just standing there with his bare hands hanging at his sides, fingers twitching slightly, like he was counting something in his head. The emergency exit door behind him was propped open with a wooden wedge, letting in the humid night air and the distant sound of sirens from the city below. "Victor, what the hell is this?" I whispered, glancing back toward the nurse's station to make sure nobody was coming. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring down at the papers. Then slowly he crouched down and began gathering them up, his movements careful and deliberate. Not rushed like someone who'd been caught doing something wrong, but methodical, like he was following some internal checklist. As he collected each file, I noticed he was organizing them somehow. Not by name or room number, but by something else I couldn't figure out. He'd pick up a file, scan it quickly, then place it in one of 3 different piles. The whole time, his lips were moving slightly, whispering something I couldn't make out. When he finally stood up, holding the sorted stacks against his chest, he looked straight at me for the first time that night. His gray eyes weren't apologetic or nervous. They were completely calm, almost satisfied. "You didn't see anything, Grace," he said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact like he was telling me the weather forecast. "You were cleaning the West Wing. You never came down this hallway." He took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed up, my cart rattling between us. The files in his arms were pressed tight against his chest, and I could see one of the patient photos peeking out, a young woman with hollow eyes and tangled hair. "These people," he continued, tilting his head slightly, "they don't matter to anyone, no visitors, no family calling. They're ghosts already, just bodies taking up beds." His free hand reached into his pocket, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might pull out a weapon. Instead, he produced a small digital camera, one of those old models from years ago. "I document them. Someone should remember they existed." The way he said it made my stomach turn. This wasn't about remembering patients or some twisted form of compassion. I'd worked there long enough to recognize the patients he'd chosen. They were all young women, all diagnosed with severe disorders that left them heavily medicated and often nonverbal. The kind of patients who couldn't report anything strange happening to them. The kind whose complaints would be dismissed as delusions. I thought about all those times Victor had disappeared during our shifts, all those restricted areas he'd accessed, the pharmacy storage room, the medication dispensary. My mind started connecting dots I didn't want to connect. "Victor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what do you do with those files, with the pictures?" He smiled then, this small, private smile like I'd asked him about a hobby he was proud of. "I visit them," he said simply, adjusting the files in his arms. "During my breaks. When the nurses rotate shifts at 3 a.m., there's a 12-minute window where the ward is essentially unmonitored. Security does their rounds at 2:45 and won't be back until 3:30. I know because I've timed it for months." He spoke like he was explaining a bus schedule, completely detached from the horror of what he was admitting. "The medications they're on, Haldol, Thorazine, Ativan, at the doses they receive, they can't form new memories anyway. Even if they could speak, they wouldn't remember." He pulled out one specific file from his stack, holding it up. "Room 4B, I knew that patient. Maria, admitted 2 months ago, no family listed, severe catatonic episodes. She had an episode last week, scratched her own arms until they bled. At least that's what the report says." The implications of his words hit me like ice water. Those scratches, those unexplained bruises the nurses sometimes found on patients, the sudden behavioral changes dismissed as part of their conditions. How long had this been happening? How many night shifts had I worked while Victor was doing God knows what to these helpless people? I wanted to run, to scream, to alert the nurses, but we were alone in that hallway, and Victor stood between me and both exits. The emergency door behind him led to a stairwell that was locked from the outside at night. The only way out was past him, toward the nurses' station. "I should get back to work," I said, gripping my mop handle tighter. "The West Wing won't clean itself." Victor shook his head slowly, taking another step forward. "No, Grace, we need to understand each other first. You have 2 kids, Lily and James, right? They go to Riverside Elementary. Your sister watches them at your apartment on Bower Street, Unit 4C. The threat was crystal clear. My whole body went rigid, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Behind Victor, down the hallway, I saw a shadow move near the nurse's station. Someone was coming. Victor must have sensed my shift in attention because he glanced back quickly. It was Dr. Harrison, the night attending, walking our way with a clipboard. Victor's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He tucked the files under his arm casually, pulled his cleaning supplies from his cart, and turned to me with a completely different expression. Tired, friendly, normal. "Hey Grace, can you help me with the supply closet inventory when you're done?" he said loudly enough for Dr. Harrison to hear. The doctor passed us with barely a glance, heading toward the locked ward at the far end. As soon as he was out of earshot, Victor's face returned to that cold, calculating expression. "You're smart, Grace. Smart enough to know that nobody would believe you anyway. A janitor accusing another janitor with no proof, just your word against mine. I've been here 3 years. Perfect record. I help the nurses, volunteer for extra shifts, never complain." He was right, and that was the worst part. Who would believe me? Victor had built himself the perfect cover over the years. The helpful, quiet janitor who knew the hospital inside and out. Meanwhile, I was the new one. The single mom desperate for work. The one who'd had that dispute with Gloria last month about my schedule. But I couldn't let him continue hurting those patients. As he walked past me toward the supply closet, still carrying those files, I made a decision. I waited until he was inside, then quickly walked to the nurse's station. The head nurse, Pamela, was there finishing paperwork. I told her there'd been a water leak in the supply closet, that we needed maintenance immediately. She called them without question. Then I went to the bathroom and used my phone to take photos of everything I could remember. The times Victor had mentioned, the room numbers, Maria in 4B. I texted them to my sister with a message. "If anything happens to me, send these to the police." When maintenance arrived, they found Victor in the supply closet with the patient files. He tried to explain them away, said he'd found them in the hallway and was storing them safely until he could return them. But maintenance had to follow protocol. Any breach of patient confidentiality meant calling security and the night administrator. While they questioned Victor, I went to check on Maria in room 4B. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, her arms bandaged from those self-inflicted scratches. I couldn't be sure, but when I whispered that she was safe now, that someone was watching out for her, I swear I saw tears roll down her cheeks. Security reviewed the camera footage from the past week. Victor had been careful, but not perfect. They found glimpses of him entering patient rooms during those unmonitored windows he'd mentioned. They found him accessing the medication storage with a key card he'd somehow duplicated. The police arrested him that morning as our shift ended. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of what Victor had been doing. They found hundreds of photos on his home computer, detailed notes about each patient's medication schedules, and evidence that he'd been selling some of the stolen medications. Several patients showed signs of abuse that had been previously attributed to their conditions. Maria and 4 other women were moved to a different facility where they could receive proper care and evaluation. As for me, I kept working at Mercy General for another month, but I couldn't shake what had happened. Every shadow in those hallways reminded me of Victor. Every quiet moment made me wonder who else might be hiding in plain sight. I eventually found a day job at a clinic across town. Less money, but worth it for the peace of mind. Gloria called me a few weeks ago to tell me Victor had taken a plea deal, 15 years with mandatory psychiatric treatment. She also told me that 3 other hospitals in the state had opened investigations into similar incidents during the years Victor had worked there before Mercy General. I still think about those patients sometimes, especially Maria, hoping they've found some measure of healing. And every time I meet someone new, someone quiet and helpful who seems to know just a little too much, I remember that night and trust my instincts. The distribution center hired me 4 months ago, right after my buddy told me they were desperate for night shift workers. The pay covered my rent and then some, which meant no more sleeping on couches or splitting a bathroom with 3 other people. My shift ran from 4 p.m. to midnight, perfect for someone who hated mornings anyway. Hit the gym around noon when only the retirees were there, grabbed groceries without fighting the after-work crowd, still had time to game before heading in. The warehouse itself was massive, probably the size of 3 football fields, with towering metal shelves that seemed to stretch forever under those harsh fluorescent lights. Most of the crew were guys around my age, all there for the same reason: decent money without needing a degree or wearing a tie. There were maybe 6 or 7 women scattered across different departments, and that's how Diane ended up in my orbit, though calling it that makes it sound like I noticed her first. Diane worked inventory control, which meant she was constantly roaming the warehouse floor with her tablet, scanning barcodes and updating counts. She had this distinctive auburn hair that caught the light in strange ways, sometimes copper, sometimes almost rust-colored, and these oversized tortoiseshell glasses that made her eyes look bigger than they probably were. Early 30s maybe, hard to tell exactly. She moved through the aisles with this calculated precision, like she was memorizing every box placement, every shelf number. During breaks, she'd claim the same spot every single time, corner table near the vending machines, facing the entrance. Her lunch routine never varied. Turkey sandwich cut into perfect triangles, apple sliced into exactly 8 pieces arranged in a circle on her napkin, and a bottle of orange juice she'd shake precisely 3 times before cracking it open. These details didn't seem important until later, until I had reason to notice patterns everywhere. The first time I saw her outside of work was at my gym, Fitness Zone, about 6 weeks into the job. Middle of a bench press set when I caught that rust-colored hair in the mirror. She was on the treadmill directly behind me, walking at this steady, measured pace. Not running, not even speed walking, just this consistent rhythm while staring straight ahead. Still wearing those same glasses too, which seemed odd for working out. I figured she must have joined recently since the place wasn't that big, and I'd never seen her there before in my 3 months of going. Gave her a polite nod when I left, and she smiled back. Not a big smile, just this small upturn at the corners of her mouth while maintaining that same walking pace. Didn't think much of it. People need gyms, and this was the cheapest one within 10 miles of the warehouse. 2 days later, I'm at the Kroger on Hillcrest doing my weekly shopping. Headphones in, zoning out in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between store brand or spending the extra $2. I reached for a box on the top shelf and nearly knocked into someone. Diane, holding a basket with exactly 3 items: a loaf of wheat bread, a package of deli turkey, and a single orange juice bottle. She laughed, this quiet little sound that was more like an exhale, and said something about us having the same shopping schedule. Her basket looked weirdly empty for a grocery run, like she came for just those specific things. We made small talk for maybe 30 seconds, weather, work schedules, how crowded the store gets on weekends, before I excused myself to finish shopping. When I was checking out 15 minutes later, I saw her at the self-checkout with those same 3 items. Nothing else. The coincidences started piling up after that. The laundromat on Saturday morning, there she was, washing what looked like a single load of dark clothes, reading a paperback with the cover folded all the way back so I couldn't see the title. The Subway near my apartment where I grabbed dinner sometimes, she'd be sitting in the booth by the window, that same measured way of eating, taking identical bites from her 6-inch veggie sub. Even at the gas station near the highway exit I used, filling up her beige Altima while I was inside buying energy drinks for my shift. Each time she'd acknowledge me with that same controlled smile, maybe a small wave, acting like it was perfectly normal to run into your coworker everywhere. Started feeling like those old spy movies where someone's always in the background, except she wasn't trying to hide. She was right there, visible, present, making sure I saw her. At work, nothing changed. She still did her inventory rounds, still sat at her corner table during breaks, still maintained that precise routine with her lunch, But now I noticed other things. How she'd sometimes walk past my forklift even when that section didn't need inventory counts. How her brakes seemed to align with mine, more often than before, even though inventory control had flexible brake schedules. How I'd catch her looking at me from across the warehouse floor, not trying to hide it, just watching with this flat, unreadable expression behind those magnified eyes. When I mentioned it to my coworker Paul during a smoke break, told him I kept running into Diane everywhere, he just shrugged and said she seemed lonely, probably didn't have many friends. But lonely people don't show up at your gym, your grocery store, your laundromat, and your gas station all within the span of a week. Then came the night I found her in my apartment complex parking lot. I'd just pulled in around 12:45 a.m. after my shift, exhausted and ready to crash, when I saw that beige Altima parked 3 spaces down from my usual spot. She was sitting inside, engine off, interior light on, writing something in a small notebook. My complex had 40 units and visitor parking on the other side, so there was zero reason for her to be in the residence section. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes waiting to see what she'd do. She just kept writing, occasionally looking up at my building, then back to her notebook. Finally, I got out and walked past her car pretending to check my phone. She didn't try to duck or hide, just looked up at me through the windshield and gave that same small smile. I kept walking, went inside and watched from my second-floor window. She sat there for another hour before driving away. I started changing my routines after that. Different gym times, shopping at the Target across town instead of Kroger, taking alternate routes home from work. For about a week, it worked. No Diane sightings outside the warehouse. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it really had been coincidences. Then on a Friday morning, I came out to my car to find a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. My first thought was a parking ticket, but the lots here don't have any restrictions. The paper was this cream-colored stationery, the expensive kind with texture you can feel. Unfolded it to find 7 words written in very neat, very precise handwriting. Why are you avoiding me, D? My apartment complex has security cameras at the entrance, but maintenance told me they'd been broken for months when I asked to see the footage. I took the note straight to HR that same afternoon, along with a written list of every time I'd seen her outside of work. The HR manager, a tired-looking woman named Carol, read through everything while tapping her pen against her desk in this irregular rhythm that made me anxious. She asked if Diane had made any threats, if she'd tried to enter my apartment, if there was any physical contact. When I said no to all 3, she gave me this look like I was wasting her time. Said she'd have a conversation with Diane about maintaining professional boundaries, but without any direct threats or harassment at work. There wasn't much else she could do. Suggested I file a police report if I felt unsafe. The cops were even less helpful. Told me that shopping at the same stores and going to the same gym didn't constitute stalking, especially since we worked at the same place. The younger officer actually chuckled and said I should be flattered by the attention. That night at work, Diane acted like nothing had happened. Same routine, same patterns, same precise movements through the warehouse. But during break, instead of her usual corner table, she sat 2 tables away from me and Paul. She didn't say anything, didn't look at us, just ate her perfectly arranged lunch, while reading that same paperback with the bent-back cover. Paul kept trying to make conversation with me about the game last night, but I couldn't focus on anything except the sound of her chewing. These small, deliberate bites that seemed louder than they should be. When break ended, she stood up, walked past our table, and dropped another folded piece of paper next to my energy drink. Same cream-colored stationery. This time it said, "Carol called. I'm sorry you feel uncomfortable. I just thought we were becoming friends. Can we talk after shift?" I looked up to respond, but she was already walking away, that measured stride carrying her back into the maze of inventory shelves. I didn't wait for her after shift. Instead, I practically ran to my car the second midnight hit, drove home checking my mirrors constantly, and deadbolted my door behind me. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my door. No knock, no sound. Just this presence I could feel through the cheap wood. I held my breath, watching the shadow under the door gap stay perfectly still for what must have been 10 minutes. Then the footsteps resumed, walking away down the hall. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch with a baseball bat across my lap and my phone ready to dial 911. The next morning, there was another note slipped under my door. You left so quickly. I brought you coffee, but you weren't available. It's getting cold outside. You should wear a jacket. I notice you never dress warm enough. D. The thing that got me was that last line. She'd been watching me close enough to notice what I wore to work every day. I quit the warehouse job that Monday, didn't even give 2 weeks' notice. Told them family emergency and never went back. Moved in with my parents 2 towns over, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media. It's been 3 months now and I still check parking lots for beige Altimas. Still feel my chest tighten when I see auburn hair in a crowd. Last week my mom mentioned she'd met a nice woman at the grocery store who had just moved to the area. Said she worked in inventory control and asked if we knew anyone hiring. The woman had distinctive reddish hair and thick glasses, very polite, very precise in how she spoke. My mom gave her my dad's company information before I could stop her. I'm looking at apartments in another state now, somewhere far from here. Sometimes being paranoid isn't paranoid at all. Sometimes someone really is watching you, learning your patterns, writing them down in neat handwriting while sitting 3 spaces away from where you park every night. Every morning at Bean and Leaf, the barista would have my oat milk latte ready before I even reached the counter. That's how predictable my routine had become after 2 years at the law firm. Same coffee shop, same drink, same booth by the window where I'd review case files before heading to the office. The place was tiny, maybe 8 tables total, walls covered in local art that changed every month, and it had this worn wooden floor that creaked in all the right places. Most mornings I was alone except for the regulars. A guy who did crosswords in pen, a woman who brought her laptop and typed furiously for exactly 1 hour, and the owner's ancient beagle who slept by the door. But that morning in March, when I walked in and saw Stephen from the litigation department sitting in my booth, something in my chest tightened. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just sitting there with his phone and a black coffee, but seeing him in my space, my morning sanctuary, made me want to turn around and leave. Stephen had this way of existing that took up more room than his body actually occupied. He'd transferred from our downtown branch 6 months earlier, and while everyone else at the firm seemed to fade into the beige walls and gray carpeting, he somehow always stood out. Not in a good way, more like when you notice a picture frame hanging slightly crooked and can't stop staring at it. He wore these brown suits that made a swishing sound when he walked, always carried a leather messenger bag that looked older than me, and had this habit of humming under his breath, these tuneless little melodies that would get stuck in your head for hours. The litigation department was on the 3rd floor. I worked on the 5th handling real estate contracts, so for months our paths rarely crossed beyond the occasional elevator ride. But lately, he'd started appearing everywhere. At the printer when I needed copies, by the water cooler during my breaks, even at the sandwich shop across the street where I usually grabbed lunch. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Chicago's a big city, but office workers tend to stick to the same spots, right? The coffee shop encounter could have been random. Maybe he lived nearby or had an early meeting. When he started commenting on my clothes, I tried to brush it off as awkward small talk. "That's a nice cardigan. Really brings out the green in your eyes," he'd said one day by the copy machine, standing close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath mixed with something minty, probably gum he'd been chewing too long. Another time, while waiting for the elevator, "Those shoes look comfortable. I bet you walk a lot." I walk too, especially in the mornings. Clears my head. Each comment came with this intense stare, like he was memorizing my face, and he'd lean forward slightly when he talked, closing the distance between us inch by inch until I'd have to step back or sideways to breathe properly. The pattern became impossible to ignore by the third week. He knew things, small things that made my scalp prickle. "Tough morning? You usually get here by 8, but it's almost 8:15, he'd mentioned on a day when my train had stalled. "Are you switching from salads to soup? Good choice, it's supposed to get cold later." He'd say these things casually, like we were friends who shared our daily schedules, but we'd never had a real conversation beyond those uncomfortable observations. My coworker Bethany, who sat in the cubicle next to mine and always had theories about everything, noticed it too. "That Steven guy asks about you a lot," she told me one afternoon while we were organizing discovery documents. "Yesterday he wanted to know if you were dating anyone, if you lived alone, what neighborhood you were in." I told him I didn't know, but he kept pushing, saying he wanted to recommend a good restaurant near you. That particular day started with him already at Bean and Leaf when I arrived at 7:15, earlier than my usual time, because I'd woken up anxious and couldn't fall back asleep. He was sitting in a different booth this time, one that faced the door, and when I walked in, he raised his coffee cup like we had planned to meet there. "Great minds think alike," he called out, loud enough that the barista looked up from the espresso machine. I grabbed my drink and left without sitting down, my appetite completely gone. The walk to the office usually took 12 minutes, but I took a longer route through the park, checking behind me every block or so. The morning was foggy, the kind where sounds carry weird and footsteps echo, and I kept thinking I heard that swishing sound his suit made. By the time I got to my desk, my shoulders ached from tension, and my coffee was cold. Around 11 a.m., I was deep in a purchase agreement when something made me look up. That feeling you get when someone's watching you. Steven was standing at the entrance to our floor's open office area, not moving, just standing there with his hands in his pockets. The 5th floor was restricted access. You needed a key card to get through the stairwell door, or elevator buttons wouldn't even work for this level without authorization. When our eyes met, he smiled and walked over, pulling a manila folder from under his arm. "Bethany asked me to bring this up," he said, placing it on my desk with deliberate slowness, his fingers lingering on the paper. But Bethany was sitting right there at her desk, clearly visible, typing away at her computer with her noise-canceling headphones on. "She didn't ask you to bring me anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head, that smile never wavering. Must have misunderstood. "Anyway, since I'm here, I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner tonight. There's this new place that serves authentic Ethiopian food. Very intimate setting." I said no, firmly, and turned back to my computer screen, but he didn't leave. He stood there for another 30 seconds, maybe 40, just breathing and existing in my peripheral vision. When he finally walked away, Bethany pulled off her headphones and wheeled her chair over. "What was that about? How did he even get up here?" she whispered, glancing toward the door. I showed her the folder. It was empty except for a single blank sheet of paper. We reported it to HR that afternoon, sitting in their sterile white office while I explained the pattern of behavior, the showing up everywhere, the comments, the unauthorized access to our floor. The HR manager, a woman named Dottie who always wore pearls and spoke in this measured, careful tone, took notes and said they'd have a conversation with him about professional boundaries. "We'll document everything, but unless there's a direct threat or physical contact, our options are limited," she explained, sliding a pamphlet about workplace harassment across the desk. The conversation HR had with Steven must have happened the next morning because by lunch, his entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the trying too hard friendliness, replaced with something darker. He'd pass me in the hallway and mutter things just loud enough for me to hear. "Some people can't take a compliment," or "paranoid much?" He started taking the stairs right behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing, feel the vibration of his steps. Once in the parking garage, I found him leaning against my car, examining his phone. When I stopped walking, keys already between my fingers, he looked up with mock surprise. "Oh, is this yours? I was just waiting for my Uber. The reception's better here." The nearest Uber pickup spot was by the main entrance, nowhere near where employees parked. But what could I prove? That he was standing near my car? That he took the same stairs? Everything existed in this gray area of plausible deniability. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. I'd taken a half day to deal with a plumbing issue in my apartment. The super was supposed to arrive between noon and 4, the usual window that meant waiting around forever. My building was one of those converted 6 flats where you could hear every footstep from the unit above, smell what your neighbors were cooking for dinner, and the radiators clanged like someone was hitting them with a wrench all winter. I lived on the 2nd floor, apartment 2B, with windows that faced the alley and a door that had 3 locks I'd installed myself after moving in. Around 2 p.m., while I was eating leftover Chinese food and reading through lease agreements on my laptop, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not unusual, except they stopped right outside my door. No knock, no doorbell, just silence. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. Whoever it was stood just outside the field of view. After maybe 2 minutes, the footsteps retreated, and I heard the building's front door slam shut. I almost convinced myself it was the plumber doing a bad job of finding the right apartment, but something made me open my door to check. There, taped at eye level, was a cream-colored envelope with my first name written in block letters. My stomach turned to ice water as I peeled it off, looking down the empty hallway before ducking back inside and throwing all 3 locks. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, the same cream color with a typed message. You looked beautiful this morning in your blue dress with the tiny flowers. The way the sunlight hit your hair at the coffee shop was like watching honey pour from a jar. I know you feel it too, this connection between us. Stop fighting it. I can be patient, but not forever. P.S. Your cat looks lonely when you're at work. Maybe she needs a friend. My cat. He'd mentioned Pepper. The windows, I thought immediately, running to check them. The fire escape ran right past my bedroom window, and from the alley, you could see straight into my living room if the curtains were open. I called the police while pulling every curtain shut, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. 2 officers showed up 40 minutes later, a younger guy who took notes and an older woman who kept checking her watch. They read the letter, looked at the envelope, asked if he'd made any explicit threats of violence. He's watching my home, he knows about my cat. He got into my building, I kept repeating, but they explained that without proof it was him. Without a direct threat of harm, they could only file a report. The older officer suggested I get security cameras, vary my routine, maybe stay with friends for a while. These types usually escalate, she said quietly while her partner was on the radio. Document everything. Get a restraining order if you can. After they left, I called in sick for the rest of the week, emailed HR the police report number, and started looking for new apartments on my phone while Pepper curled up next to me, oblivious to why I kept checking the locks. That night I barely slept, jumping at every noise from the street, every creak of the old building settling. Around 3 a.m. I heard something that made me grab my phone to record. Footsteps on the fire escape, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside my bedroom window. A shadow passed across the curtain, stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, then moved on. The recording captured the metallic groan of the fire escape under someone's weight, and what sounded like fingers dragging across the glass. I called 911 again, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had gone. The next morning, I packed a bag and went to stay with my cousin in the suburbs, submitted my 2 weeks' notice via email, and started the paperwork for a restraining order. The law firm tried to convince me to stay, offered to transfer Stephen to another branch, but I was done. Later, I found out from Bethany that they'd found a whole folder in his desk with photos of me printed from the company directory, social media, even some that looked like they'd been taken from across the street with a zoom lens. He was fired, but as far as I know, never faced any real consequences. I moved to a different state 2 months later, changed my social media handles, and still check every window twice before bed.